Good evening. Welcome to another segment of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame. Tonight we'll be talking to the Honorable Beverly Savitt. Judge Savitt is the first woman to serve on the Marin County Superior Court judge, and she served between 1983 until her recent retirement in March of 1995. And Judge, tell me what it was like to be inducted into the Marin Women's Hall of Fame.
It made me more nervous than being inducted as a judge.
Really?
Right. I was I was thrilled to find out that I was chosen, but more importantly, I had attended several in the past, and the women who were selected were so impressive, both with their accomplishments and their speeches, that I was extremely nervous when it came to the evening in which I was to be inducted. And but it was a marvelous experience.
Judge, tell me about your early years.
Well, I was born just prior to the Depression. And so I grew up during some of the most fascinating years in our history, the Depression, World War II. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My father was what we call a traveling salesman now. I guess you would call him a sales rep, as they do. And my mother was a housewife. We were fairly poor during the Depression, but we managed to live in a rather nice neighborhood. They lost their house during the Depression. But Dad, in about 1933 or 4, got a job, his last job that lasted in the rest of his working career. And he was successful at it, and we could afford to rent in this fairly nice neighborhood. And so we went to school in a good school district.
Were your parents college educated?
Oh, no. In fact, they went to high school at night. They came from very, very poor family. And they both went to work when they were 14.
Yet you had a brother and a sister.
I have a brother and sister. My sister has a PhD in psychology, and my brother is a judge in a federal district in western Pennsylvania. Yes, he's the baby in the family. So we've been, they were very stressed education enormously for all of us, and were very supportive in that respect.
So was it expected in your family that all of you would go to college?
Oh, yes. There wasn't any question. Never even occurred to me that I wouldn't. It wasn't expected of us that we would go to graduate school, of the girls at any rate. I think it was more so my brother, but not of us. But one of the things that I learned, and I'm not sure from whom, I believe my mother, is that I could do anything that I really seriously wanted to do. And that I didn't even know that women were discriminated against until I grew up, really, because I was never told that there was something I wasn't supposed to do because I was a woman.
But that attitude must have had an enormous impact in terms
I think it did. I think it did. When I thought things through and decided what I wanted, I just went after it. For instance, when I started as an undergraduate at a school that is now Carnegie Mellon University, but was Carnegie Institute of Technology at the time, I wanted to be a math major. And they didn't have women in the science and engineering school. Another girl and I just went over and talked the dean into allowing us to take our math in that school.
Any lawyers or judges in your family growing up?
Not at that generation. In my parents' generation, no one went to college except one uncle, and he was in merchandising, and considerably younger than my parents. But in our generation, virtually all of us went to school and became professionals, and I have, aside from my brother, I have 2 cousins who are lawyers, and on the next generation, our children, we have something like 6 or 7 who are lawyers. And my daughter, at age 41, has just finished her 2nd year of law school at Santa Clara. So we keep, it's a field that we've all loved.
Where do you suppose you got the idea to go to law school growing up? Where do you think that came from?
I don't think I got the idea growing up. I think that my family, I mean, I was nursed on political talk. It was of vital interest to my family, and particularly my mother's family, and probably once a week at least she'd have her brothers and her sisters over, or we'd be at one of their houses, and they would argue constantly about politics.
So you were comfortable with a lot of verbal battering?
They ran the gamut of conservative Republican to possibly a card-carrying communist. I'm not sure about Uncle Harry, but if he didn't carry the card, he could have. Right.
Tell me about your legal career.
My legal career started slowly. I didn't start law school until I was 37. And I was probably 30, 31 by the time I finally made up my mind about what I wanted to be when I grew up.
So you didn't always have it in your mind that you wanted to be a judge?
No, not at all.
And you had a career also before becoming an attorney, didn't you?
Yes, sort of a career. I was a school teacher for a few years before I had children. My husband and I got married when we were both quite young.
As I recall, you got married the day you graduated from college,
Right.
didn't you?
I was 20, and I didn't get any graduation presents.
Your husband might take issue with
Right, right. At any rate, so I taught for about 5 years while he was still in school, and then at the beginning of his career. And then I had children, a son Charles and a daughter Susanna.
And what effect did that have on your teaching?
In those days, one didn't teach and have a family at the same time. In fact, in Maryland, it was the law that you had to take leave at the end of your 2nd month of pregnancy, back in the very early 1950s.
Let's hope that law isn't on the books still.
No, I think it was found unconstitutional. However, during those years that I was attempting to raise my children, I was doing other things that I found really interesting.
And what did that include?
It included a variety of civic activity with concentration on the League of Women Voters and Democratic political activities at various levels.
Where were you living at the time?
To begin with, in Maryland, and I became active in politics really in the 1952 political campaign.
You became
presidential.
a political junkie, actually.
I did. I licked stamps at national headquarters in 1952 and knocked on doors in my neighborhood in Maryland. I also was active in the League of Women Voters and really have a lot of appreciation for that organization because I learned how to do research and to make reports there.
You also rose to quite a position with the League of Women Voters, didn't you?
Later, after we moved to Illinois, I became the first vice president of our local league there, yes. And then when we did move to Illinois in 1954, as indicated, became active with the League again, and also became active with the Democratic Party. And in 1956, I believe, I became the Democratic committee woman from our district.
So this was after you'd been teaching for a few years and you had some children, and this is what you were doing when you were being a mother and a housewife.
I was being a mother and a housewife, right.
Right.
And I did other community things, like was on the co-op nursery school board and ultimately the president of that board. Worked on our local library committee.
What did you learn from all those community activities and political activities that you were participating in?
I learned a great deal about what makes government work and how to get along with people and how to get people to my side of an issue. I learned how to public speaking. I learned how much people appreciate being respected for their opinions, and that someone who will listen to them.
You yourself had a foray into politics, didn't you?
Personal, yes. I ran and was elected the first woman city council member in Park Forest, Illinois,
When was
1961.
What did you think of that experience?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the political aspect of it. One of the reasons I had determined that I was going to go to law school at sometime in the near future was because I was politically ambitious. And after serving 2 terms on that board, I determined that I didn't want to be a legislator. That was the least enjoyable part
So in some ways it wasn't
of
really,
my interest in politics.
so it didn't really turn out the way that you
No.
imagined it would exactly.
But what it did is it reinforced my desire to go to law school, because the part I enjoyed the most was in working with the city attorney and writing ordinances and so on, and doing planning,
So you saw,
zoning. So that's when I started law school, while I was on the city council, and I've never looked back.
so you saw you could have an influence with a law degree in a different way than you had originally imagined.
Right.
And you said you started law school when you were 37.
I was 37.
And what was that like?
It was fun. It was wonderful to go back to school. I had been out of school for 16 years, almost 17 years. And it was extremely stimulating for me
How old were your
to
children?
get away from the suburban neighborhood and get to school. Susie was in 5th grade, 10, and Chuck was in 7th grade, 12, when I started.
What was your family's reaction when you went to law school?
Fine, fine. I think the children probably felt a little bit deprived from time to time. But I think I was probably with them as much when I was in law school as I was when I was in politics.
Couldn't have been a lot of women in your law school class then.
I was the only one.
And you didn't have any problem with that.
I didn't have any problem. Some of my fellow students had a problem with it. But I had no problem with it. I enjoyed it.
And what year was that you started law school?
1963.
And where did you start?
At DePaul in Chicago.
And you ultimately ended up at Bolt.
Right. We decided to move to the Marin County, the Bay Area, and then the Marin County in actually in 1964, and we actually moved in early 1965. So that after a year and a half of law school, I was out of school for a semester and applied to Bolt. I had gotten rather good grades at DePaul, so I thought I'd try Bolt, which was highly competitive.
And as a woman trying to get into Bolt in the 60s, did that create any challenges at all?
A little. I went over to, well, first I called and asked for an application. When they asked me what it was for, it was to come in as a transfer student. They told me there was no point in my applying because I wouldn't get in.
Right on the phone?
Right on the phone. And since I had the catalog, which indicated that they took transfer students with a B or better average from other law schools, and I had a much better average than that, I insisted, and they finally sent me an application.
You had to beg for it, though.
Right. And then after it was all filled out and I got all of the required references and grade records from my previous schools, I heard nothing after I mailed it to them.
What'd you do?
Well, I went over to Bolt and I asked to see the Dean of Admissions. And the same administrative aide who had refused to give me the application in the first place refused to allow me to see the Dean of Admissions.
This person was consistent.
She was, she was. And she told me that that was impossible. He didn't see applicants. So I went outside and took a walk and tried to determine what I should do about that. And when I came back, I noticed that the office was closed, and it closed from 12 to 1. And I had seen the administrative assistant go out to lunch late, about 12:30. So when she wasn't back at 1 o'clock, when the office reopened, and I walked in and asked another young lady if I could see the Dean of Admissions, and she just ushered me in to his office like that. And that's part of the way of success in life, is persistence.
You certainly were, and you
Right.
got the dean to take action on the application.
It took a little bit of talking, but yes, I did.
And you were 40 when you graduated?
41, because I lost a year in the moving. I had I started in the summer of '65, and I had to have 2 full years at Bolt in order to get a degree. So that I was 41 actually when I graduated and took the bar.
That was 67?
67.
So in 1967, the legal community was probably throwing jobs at your feet at that time, right?
Hardly, hardly.
And what was it like to look for a job at that time?
It was very difficult for women. Even the younger women in my class, and I think I was the oldest member of the class, had a hard time. None of the big firms were offering, or few of the big firms were even interviewing the women. And in our class, the first two members of our class were women.
The number 1 and 2 in the
One
class?
and 2 in the class. And one of them clerked for a justice trainer. The other one was offered a job to teach at UCLA. But neither of them were offered a job with any of the large firms.
That went to number 3 and 4 in the
Right.
class.
And the idea of getting an interview at age 41, no one was interested in interviewing me in the private sector.
So what'd you do?
I did interview for a couple of public jobs, but they weren't exactly what I was looking for. And to be truthful, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. The children at that time were in high school and junior high. And I decided it would make more sense for me to practice in Marin County so that I could be available if I was needed.
Closer to the children?
Right. I wrote to every firm in San Rafael that had more than 2 names.
Probably weren't that many at that time.
There were few, and I got no answers except for one firm who didn't have a position. But fortunately, at the urging of some of my classmates who knew about Ann Diamond, who was in practice here for several years, I went over to talk to her, and she was extremely helpful.
Now, Ann Diamond is a legend in the legal community, but for those who don't know about her, maybe you can tell us a little bit about her.
Well, Ann was really the most creative and possibly the best family law lawyer, not only in San Rafael, but maybe California at the time. She was a real leader. She was thoughtful about the problems of family law and treated it as a profession. It was not a field that I thought I was particularly interested in getting into, but she was so enthusiastic about it that she talked me into trying it.
So what happened when you went to see her that day?
Well, we talked about what I could do, and she made a suggestion that while I was looking, that I'd do some volunteer work for legal aid. I think she was president of legal aid at the time. And there was no paid staff at that time in legal aid. And I did, 3 days a week. At that time, the legal aid office was next door in the Albert building to her office. She was a partner with Dave Beatty, who later became a municipal court judge. And I would interview a client, and then I would run next door and ask them questions. They were very helpful. And within a couple of weeks, I found that I was doing all my work, and they had a little conference room that was quite small, but had a window. It was nice, because legal aid didn't have a window. And so I did my work there, and after about 4 or 5 weeks, I talked them into letting me rent that office. And so I started my law practice in that office, paying rent by doing work for them.
And how long did you continue?
Had my furniture contributed by a friend who was in the office furniture business, and I think it cost me about $50 to print cards. And I even got my name on their stationery, so it didn't cost anything to amount to anything. It was a wonderful way to start, and of course I had the advantage of having a husband who was able to support me in the style to which I wished I was accustomed, could become accustomed.
Yes.
So it was nice. It was a nice way to start.
And then ultimately you worked with Ann.
And then the following year I became a partner, and it was all up from there.
You became quite a specialist in family law.
I did.
Tell me about that.
Family law is a very challenging field of law. You're working with clients who are generally very upset. If they're the spouse who is being left and rejected, they're devastated. It's almost as bad or worse than having a spouse die. If you're representing the spouse who wants the separation and the divorce, there are other emotions that go with that, feelings of guilt, feelings of anger, of not wanting to pay support, and so on. And it's quite complicated in dealing with their emotions and also dealing with the legal issues that go with every divorce case. And the legal issues are complex. But it was fascinating, and it was satisfying in many respects, because a year or 2 years later, when the case was over and you saw your client again for some reason, you saw a different person. They returned to normal.
When did you start thinking about becoming a judge?
When Judge Wilson announced that he was going to retire.
And that inspired you?
In 1982, right. And it occurred to me that that would be a good time to apply.
And there are several ways of becoming a judge: being appointed and being elected. And
2 ways, right.
And how did you go about it?
Well, Judge Wilson was retiring in the middle of his term, and when a judge retires in the middle of his or her term, the governor may appoint someone to fill the opening.
And so you made the application to Governor Brown.
Right.
And tell me about that process.
That's a really difficult process. At that time, the application was 35 pages long. And not only did you have to tell them about your entire life and how many cases you had tried, and name the 10 and your opponents and so on, but you had to get a lot of references. Your name was then submitted to a commission on judicial qualifications, called for short the Jenny Commission, who interviews every applicant whose name is submitted by the governor.
There were quite a few other people who had their name in at the same time.
9 others.
And do you remember getting that call from the governor's office?
How could I forget?
Tell me about it.
It took a long time. It took months. But on New Year's Eve of 1982, of December 31st, 1982, we'd closed the office early, and I got home to get ready to go out about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and the phone was ringing. And when I picked it up, it was the governor.
It must have been so exciting.
It was, to tell me that it was very exciting. Another friend of mine who had applied for another position in San Francisco was tracked down to a restaurant that night. The governor was going out of office on the 2nd.
Oh, and had to make the appointments.
Had to make the appointments.
When were you sworn in?
In Sacramento at the governor's office, and all of the new appointees of that, what we call the midnight appointees, were sworn in at the governor's office, so it was a big party.
And that's when you became the first woman to serve on the Superior Court in Marin County.
That's right.
What special challenges or adversity do you recall facing while you were on the bench? So you had one election.
Oh, I did have an election. That's correct. In after a judge is appointed by the governor, he or she must run in the next general election, and that for me was the election of June 1984. One of the people who had applied for the job the same time that I did, Terry Boren, was an assistant district attorney, and he opposed me in the election. It was a time when many of Jerry Brown's appointees were being opposed all over the state, and primarily by someone from a district attorney's office. It was interesting. Brought back all my political experience that I'd forgotten about.
Yeah, you ran quite a campaign.
I ran quite a campaign. It was obviously a successful one. And in fact, I think my vote was 2-1.
In your favor.
Right.
Yes.
It was really interesting.
I know that you have really enjoyed being a judge. What did you love the most about it?
I loved the variety, the intellectual stimulation, the stimulation of dealing with people of different types and kinds and with different problems. I like being a problem solver, and that's the main job of a judge.